In June of 2012, Jennifer Bukowsky was invited to come to Warrensburg, Missouri to speak to 770 17-year-old girls who were attending a week-long program called Girl State, which teaches young women how to participate in government. Prior to Jennifer's speech, there was a flag ceremony, and then, as the girls took their seats in the assembly hall, Jennifer fielded questions from reporters for the Gazette, the Girl State newspaper.
Please join me in welcoming criminal defense attorney, Ms. Jennifer Bukowsky. Thank you, Governor Buckner, and good evening, citizens. As Maya said, my name is Jennifer. Good evening. As Maya said, my name is Jennifer Bukowsky, and tonight I'd like to explain to you why I'm a criminal defense attorney and a business owner, and you should be too. By a show of hands, how many of you currently plan to become criminal defense attorneys? Anyone? A couple. That's 2 more than I thought I'd get, or 4 more than I thought I'd get. Well, great. Well, if you didn't raise your hand, don't fear. Believe me, when I was 17 years old, I had no idea that I would be standing here 17 years later, twice your age suddenly, and be explaining why I chose to be a criminal defense attorney. And you may be wondering why I spend my time defending criminals. But criminal defense isn't about defending criminals. It's about defending an individual from the government. It's about individual liberty. And when I fight to protect the Constitution on behalf of my clients, I'm fighting to protect the Constitution for everyone. And before I get into my remarks, I'd like to congratulate you on being selected for this program. It seems like a wonderful thing, and I wish I had been selected when I was in high school. Unfortunately, I wasn't, but my husband was, so I've been hearing about it, Boys State, for 12 years now, so I'm excited to finally be at Girls State. I'd like to give you, I know you guys are very familiar, well, thank you. I know you guys are very familiar for your age with the government and how the government works, but I'd like to just give you a brief overview of the criminal justice system. It's a 3-part, 3 kind of components of it. We have those on offense, those on defense, and we have referees. On offense, we have law enforcement agencies and law enforcement officers. This is your police, your sheriff, your highway patrol. It's their job to investigate crimes and arrest suspects that they believe are responsible for a crime. They need what's called probable cause to make their arrest, which means they have proof that it's more likely than not that that person committed that offense. Also on offense, you have prosecutors, who are the attorneys for the state. And I'm just talking about the state, not the federal government at this point. Prosecutors decide whether to file a charge, what charge to file, and then they pursue the case as it works its way through the court system. They can plead it out, or they could pursue it through a jury trial. If it goes to a jury trial, it's their burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is guilty for the charged offense. So that's your offense, the law enforcement agencies and the prosecutor. On defense, you have the accused, who's called the defendant, and you have the criminal defense attorney, along with her team of paralegals and sometimes investigators. It's the job of the criminal defense team to defend the accused. There's no obligation to present evidence, but you can present evidence in defense of your client if you wish to. But you can also challenge the evidence that the state offers on different grounds of constitutionality or inadmissibility for other reasons. The duty of the criminal defense attorney is to ensure that the client receives their constitutional rights. They get a fair trial, they get due process, they get the right to confront their accusers, and the opportunity for a counselor, an attorney, to present their side of the story. The referees in the criminal justice system are made up of your jury and your judges. The jury is 12 qualified citizens that hear the evidence in a case if it goes to a jury trial. And 95% of cases don't go to jury trial, over 95%, but if they do, there's a jury that's selected, and a lot of them aren't very happy to be there. And about 100 of them sometimes show up and they get picked, 12 of them get picked, and then they hear the evidence and deliberate and have to find whether or not the state proved beyond a reasonable doubt guilt, and they have to decide that unanimously. Presiding over the proceedings as a referee is the trial court judge. The judge is going to decide things about admissibility of evidence and other things and preside over all the proceedings, starting with the arraignment, which is the first court proceeding after an arrest, through sentencing and even parole or probation revocation hearings. So they'll sentence the defendant and things like that. And then above them, like higher up referees, I guess if you have a replay or something, are your appellate court judges. You have the Court of Appeals in the state of Missouri. We have 3 districts of those, and then the Missouri Supreme Court above that. They aren't hearing like the facts or deciding facts. They review the record and appeal to decide the issues that the parties have brought before them. So we have a lot of people on offense in the criminal justice system. And that's because a significant part of our government is focused, as it should be, on public safety. You know, arresting the bad guys and keeping us all safe. And I'd like to see how many of you are playing offense this week. So can I see a show of hands if you are highway patrol, or police chief, or a candidate for prosecutor, or a candidate for sheriff? All right, keep them up. That's quite a few. Leave your hand up if you've never made a mistake in your life and you never think you ever will. That's one. No, none. Great. Well, citizens, the government is made up of human beings, and human beings are flawed. We all make mistakes. Ergo, the government makes mistakes. As we saw by a show of hands, the government has a lot of people, a lot of resources, a lot of time and energy spent towards putting the bad guys away to make us safe. But what if they make a mistake as to who the bad guy is, or what exactly went on? What's to stand if you get arrested for something that you didn't do? What's to stand in between you and all the people who are seeking to put you in, lock you up? That would be me, if you're my client, and my weapon is the Constitution. And that's the only weapon we have, and it's something we need to protect in this country. On TV, they make cases seem like it's very cut and dry, who's guilty and who's innocent, and you know, it's either black or white, you know, and it's resolved by the end of the hour-long television show. But in real life, things are a whole different range of gray. And it's sometimes hard for the individuals, the human beings that are involved in a particular case, to make a decision as to, is this a crime or not? You know, what kind of crime is this that occurred? And is this the person that did it? It has serious implications when the prosecutor makes the charging decision on people's lives. And they don't always have all the information at the time they make that decision. So they can make mistakes. Now, sometimes I'm able to convince the prosecutor, you've made a mistake here, you've got the wrong person, or that's not what happened, or consider these things, or these statements from witnesses that also were present. And sometimes I'm able to convince them they've made a mistake and to dismiss the case, and that's a huge victory for my client. They have to file this piece of paper called a nolli prosequi when that happens, and I've saved all of my nolli prosequis, and I counted them earlier today, and I've got 39 and counting so far. But they're, yeah. I bet you haven't heard the term nolli prosequi, but it's one of my favorite, nollies are one of my favorite things in the whole world. But the prosecutor doesn't always admit when they're wrong. Sometimes they're wrong on the facts, and you go to the jury. Sometimes they're wrong on the law, and you go to the judge. I had a case where the prosecutor was wrong as to the facts. I had a 6-day murder trial earlier this year that the Governor Maya mentioned earlier. My client, Tony, was one of 8 men charged with felony murder in a homicide that occurred on homecoming weekend in October of 2010. Under the felony murder law, if you are engaged in the commission of a felony and someone dies as a result, you can be charged with murder even if you had no part of the actual killing of that individual. Now, the state in this case alleged that the victim was driving around the parking lot of the break time gas station with his doors open and his music blaring, and he was flashing money, these rolls of dollar bills. And they alleged that my client, along with 7 other guys, were this group of thugs that converged in a brutal attack on this guy who was by himself to rob him of his money, and they shot him during the course of that robbery. Now, my client, when he talked to police, told them that he was on the parking lot and he saw a fight break out. And he was there with his cousin, and he didn't touch the victim, he didn't shoot the victim, he didn't know anything about a robbery. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he ran like everybody else did when shots were fired. The police and the prosecutor did not believe Tony, and they charged him with felony murder and robbery. Then the state sent me and the other defense attorneys an overwhelming amount of information to pick through, over 9,000 pages and 200 discs of things to sort through and try to piece together what really happened here. By the time my case went to trial, 7 of the 8 co-defendants had already pled or been found guilty. And my client was the final one to stand trial. And after piecing together through all this information and deposing people and talking to everyone, I was able to sort out what happened and present that to the jury. And it wasn't a robbery that broke out in the parking lot of the break time that night. It was a fight. There was no missing money at all. The victim had his money, his wallet, his gold necklace, his gold watch, his gold bracelet, his gold ring, and his green Gucci shoes on when he was found. Nothing was missing. And not only that, he wasn't alone, attacked by this group of 8 thugs. He was with 5 other guys, 2 of whom had guns, and one of those guys started the escalation of the fight into a gunfight and fired the first shot that night. One of the friends of the victim started the gunfight. I told the jury after that very long 6-day jury trial with the Platte County jury, anyone from Platte? I like Platte County a lot right now. I told them that the government makes mistakes, but you can't take your freedom away unless it proves to the 12 jurors, beyond a reasonable doubt, guilt. And the jury went back to deliberate, and we learned later that they were unanimous at the outset that the verdict was not guilty. They looked for evidence that a robbery had taken place for 4.5 hours, found none, and acquitted. And it was the first acquittal in a Boone County murder case in 47 years. It only happened, though, because there was a criminal defense attorney and her team that picked through all that information to present an adequate defense to the jury on behalf of their client. Sometimes the mistakes the prosecutor would make concern the law. They don't always apply the law correctly. And in that case, you go to the judge to argue your case to the judge. For example, I had a client, a 17-year-old girl, who was arrested and charged with unlawful use of a weapon for having a pocket knife on a school bus. And it was a pocket knife that her deceased brother had, and it was special to her, and she had it in her backpack, and they charged her with unlawful use of a weapon. And I don't know if you're aware, but having a criminal conviction is kind of a big deal. You know, it kind of really hurts your chances of doing anything with your life, getting employment, going to college, things like that. And I looked at the statute, and the definition of knife in the weapons statute specifically excluded pocket knives with blades of 4 inches or less in length. The prosecutor was stubborn and said, well, it falls under dangerous instrument. So we litigated that matter to the judge, and I'm happy to say the case was eventually dismissed. But it wasn't decided by an appellate court judge, so it's not binding on all the other counties in Missouri necessarily, so I recommend against carrying pocket knives in school buses in case you run into an overzealous prosecutor. But sometimes the government doesn't make a mistake as to the facts or the law. Sometimes the mistake was made by my client. And I get asked pretty often, have you ever had to represent someone that you knew was guilty, and how did you handle that? And I've got to say that over 90% of the people I represent are guilty of something. And unfortunately for them, there's no such thing in the practice of law as a motion to change the facts. And that's what a lot of them would need to be able to get off their charges. But that doesn't end my role as an advocate on behalf of my client, because people make mistakes. But not everyone should be judged solely on their bad choice or the bad decision that they made in life. For example, I've had several cases like this. Suppose you go to the University of Missouri-Columbia, and I hope you do. And for reasons reasons I won't speculate about, you decide to have the identification of someone that's over the age of 21 in your wallet. You get pulled over for speeding, and the officer sees that identification in your wallet and arrests you because that's illegal. It's Class A misdemeanor to be under 21 and have in your possession an identification of someone who's over 21 years of age, even if they don't even look like you. You can't do it. So keep that in mind. But should that police officer, a Class A misdemeanor, is punishable by up to a year in jail? Should you have to just go to jail then for a year and not get out for a year? Hopefully not, because we have ranges of punishment for a reason, because not everyone needs the full vote on the punishment. I mean, not every individual is someone that you need to make an example of and throw the full book at. So a lot of what I do is, convince the prosecutor this is a good kid. She went to Girls' State. She, is a college student. She was work. She volunteers. She's a good person. Cut her a break. And I try to minimize the effect on my client's record in the future. Give her an opportunity to not have that on her permanent record. Get probation or whatever it is to work the case out to show my client a path forward with the least amount of damage as possible. Sometimes you can't reach an agreement. Your client and the state, the prosecutor, they cannot see eye to eye, and you reach an impasse, and then you go to trial. Whether or not your client did anything wrong isn't the point. The point is you are that person's advocate for that trial, and you're going to make sure that they get a fair trial and they get to say their side of the story. I had a murder in the first degree case. And there is no question that my client had killed his ex-brother-in-law in the parking lot at the McDonald's. It was on videotape. He surrendered immediately afterwards. There was a note in his wallet stating his intent in case he had been killed by the police. He had planned this. He had laid there waiting for him, and he had target practiced and posted on MySpace. There was MySpace back in 2007, in case maybe you don't remember it, but it was kind of a open and shut deal it wasn't a whodunit by any means, but the only possible punishment for murder in the first degree is either death or life without parole. And before you send someone to prison for life without parole, where they're only coming out in a coffin one way or the other, they are entitled to have their day in court and to say their side of the story. And that was my role. And I looked into this, and I was able to show to the jury that, look, this guy that he killed was mentally unstable, had been abusive to these kids. My client was genuinely concerned that this guy was going to kill his sister and her children. But the jury considered the evidence. I also tried to argue that he had diminished mental capacity, so it was really a murder second. We had a 7-day jury trial. The jury was at 4.5 hours. They were from Lafayette. Anyone from Lafayette? Yeah, they found him guilty. But my role wasn't to necessarily get him off. It was to make sure he had his fair day in court, because he's going to be in prison a long time. And believe it or not, he was a really, really nice guy. Never any priors before, and it was just a horrible situation. But it didn't stop me from defending him because he'd done something bad. That was my job to defend him. I'd like to caution you to never give up liberty to those promising safety. The greatest threats to our liberty come in times when we have a terrorist attack or other things that cause us to feel unsafe. And that's when those in power say, we'll make you safe, just give up, just let us torture people or kill people or imprison them without a trial. Then we'll make you safe, but be careful. Because no person, no matter how well-intentioned, can ever really make you safe from anything. That's not the way the world works. We could get hit by an airplane right now for all we know. There's nothing, giving up your freedom isn't going to make you safe. And if we have someone who commits a crime or attempts to commit a crime, we have some tough prisons that we can lock them in for a long time. So there's no need to give up your liberty in order to feel safe. And we can't just allow the government to lock people up or kill them without giving them due process, because the government makes mistakes. And the danger in allowing those in power to take your freedom to make you safer is that you're not safe from them anymore if they make a mistake and come after you or a loved one. And whether you become a criminal defense attorney or not, it's your responsibility as an American to stand up and fight those who want to take away your freedom, because nothing will endanger you more than losing that. And the prosecutor candidates, so we probably have 14 prosecutor candidates that are going to find out tomorrow whether or not they win prosecutor. I have a spoiler alert for you. 7 of you are going to lose. And that's okay, that's part of the process. But thanks to our Constitution, the girls who win aren't going to be able to just lock you in prison so you can't run against them again. That's what would happen if you gave people in power that kind of thing. They would lock away people who sought to challenge them, or there's that risk. Or people would be afraid to stand up to challenge those in power because they're afraid that the people in power would do bad things to them. So I'm sure that you guys, has anyone heard of wrongful convictions? You know, DNA evidence shows that someone's been in prison forever. That doesn't make you feel good about the criminal justice system or the results that come out of it. So part of being a criminal defense attorney is actually, it gives credibility to the process. If you have a good criminal defense attorney, you have more confidence in the integrity of the results. And the opposite is true too. If you have a bad criminal defense attorney or a lazy criminal defense attorney or someone that doesn't prepare an adequate defense on behalf of their client, that's when bad things start happening. That's when people in power start abusing their power because they go unchallenged, and you have some bad results and some injustices. So having good criminal defense attorneys out there is as important as having good police and prosecutors out there in keeping our system running the way it should. We have to have protections against the inevitable mistakes of the government. Now, I ended up becoming a criminal defense attorney, and it was kind of an untraditional path towards that. I went to Mizzou, I majored in accounting. I heard that was the highest starting salaries. Hey, Mizzou. Okay. Well, I hope you all come to Columbia, Missouri, and if you do, and you get arrested, don't talk to the police, and then give me a call. But I started out as a CPA, an accountant. And worked for a big accounting firm. I got engaged, went to law school, and both summers worked for a big law firm. That's what I planned to do, was go that route. And I did get to clerk for Judge Russell in the Missouri Supreme Court, which was a great experience. But then, my last semester of law school, I went to a presentation that changed my life. It was one by prosecutors and public defenders. And I didn't even want to go to this thing. I had to. It was some stupid requirement that we had to meet to graduate. But it really changed the course that I took with my life, because the public defender who presented was so passionate about what he did and believed in the Constitution so much that I decided I wanted to work with that guy and do what he did. And so I did. And it was a great experience. And for those of you that might not be familiar with what public defenders are, they're attorneys that represent people who are unable to afford an attorney, that are charged with crimes, that are indigent. They meet certain qualifications and thresholds for poverty. And unfortunately, the majority of the people who are prosecuted for crimes, especially serious ones, meet those qualifications for the public defender. And making sure that we have a good public defender system is important to preserving freedom in the country, because if those most vulnerable, if their rights are protected, then we can be sure that everyone's rights are protected. And the time I served in the public defender's office in Columbia was busy. I handled over 1,000 cases in a little over 3 years. That's opening and closing more than a case per day. It was exhausting. It was a lot of experience. I had a lot of jury trials, everything that you can think of, charges you've never heard of, I guarantee. Things I had never heard of until it got a file. Whoa, what's that crime? I've never heard that one. I had to do what's called read 'em and plead 'em, where you go to court, literally introduce yourself to your client, spend 5 minutes going over things with them, and they go, okay, I'll take that plea, and they go and plead out. That happens quite a bit. And that's not a good way to be a criminal defense attorney, because you're not really giving a full chance to review a case and decide whether that's the best option for your client. And when I first got there, I wanted to do everything I could on every case. And if a client wanted to plead to something and I thought I could get even the slightest bit better of a deal, I would argue with the client, no, please give me a chance to fight. You know, we can gather this evidence or do this or that. Try to convince the prosecutor to do this or that for you. And I kept working at it like that, but no matter how many nights and weekends I worked, with the time constraints and the number of cases that I was being handed, I just couldn't do that on every case anymore. I had to start moving the cases along. So I didn't argue with those clients that wanted to plead guilty quite as much anymore. I said, okay, you can, But then I got to the point where I had a client who didn't want to plead guilty. And the offer really wasn't that fair, but it crossed my mind that it would be easier to convince this client to take an unfair plea deal than it would be to convince the prosecutor to offer a fair plea deal. When that thought crossed my mind, I knew I had to leave the public defender's office because I didn't go to law school to sell out my clients. I didn't want to be a sloppy or lazy attorney. I wanted to be an excellent attorney, and that wasn't going to be possible if I stayed at the public defender's office with the number of cases I was handed. I mean, I'd fight and fight and fight and get a good result for one client, go back and my mailbox would be stuffed full of 8 new cases, and half of them are in jail, and they have been for 3 weeks, and they're mad at me already because they haven't seen me yet. But it's just they're facing a caseload crisis in the public defender's system, and we really need to do something about it. But, so when I left, I did something that my husband had been trying to talk me into doing for 10 years. He's a business owner. It never had occurred to me to own my own business. Growing up, no one ever suggested that to me. He suggested it quite often, and I finally listened to him after 10 years, and now that I do, I love it. I mean, being a business owner is really freedom, and you get to be the boss, and you get to make decisions, and it's liberating, and it's fun, and it's exciting. It's a lot of responsibility. But now that I've done it, I don't know if I could ever work for anyone ever again. I can say no to cases. I can control the number of cases I have, so I can make sure that I deliver the results and spend the time I need to on each case. I don't need permission to go. On Friday afternoon, I went to the pool with my kids. Didn't have to ask anybody's permission to do that. That's what I did. I mean, you have responsibilities. I have employees. I have to make sure that we can pay the rent and pay my employees' payroll. But it really is freedom, and I can comment. I'm on the radio once a week commenting about whatever I feel like commenting on. As a government employee, you don't get to go on the radio once a week and just voice your mind about different political matters. But you've got to pay the cost to be the boss, but it's definitely worth the price, so I hope you consider it. And there are ways besides being a government employee. This program is great because it shows you how to be engaged in government and be part of government, but there's ways to be a good citizen or to change the world that don't involve being employed by the government, and I hope you consider that. I'm involved with not-for-profits in my town. A couple of them I'll touch on. I am on the board of the Heart Missouri United Way, and we're implementing a community impact model where we look at not just the immediate needs of people, they're hungry or they need temporary shelter or whatever. We look at what caused that person to be in that situation to begin with where they couldn't provide themselves with food or shelter, and try to address the causes of those needs in our community so that we don't have as many people with needs and we empower people to take care of themselves. It's a community-wide program, and I'm excited to be part of implementing it. I'm also on the board of the Chamber of Commerce for the City of Columbia, and we're looking at all sorts of different ways to grow our economy and improve our community. We're focused right now on entrepreneurship and innovation, and we're also focused on getting the Mizzou students to stay in Columbia after graduation. So I'm excited about those things since they'll both benefit our community quite a bit. If you really want to change the world, you can innovate. I mean, the biggest changes and improvements to our style of living haven't come from governments or not-for-profits. They've come from innovators and people who took chances. And things like the airplane or the car, those weren't government or not-for-profit, or even Facebook. That's changed the world. It's empowered so many people. There's a lot of criticism of it. I know I'm a big Facebook person. Like my law firm on Facebook, please. But it's really empowered people to communicate with each other and connect in ways that they never had before. It's changed the world, and it's not a government or not-for-profit. It's a private business. Private business is, quite frankly, what allows us to pay for government and not-for-profit. And I think that we need to stop looking to the government to solve every problem for us. We're free people, and we can use the government as a tool to address our problems, but it's just one tool in our toolbox, and we can work together to fix our problems in other ways as well. We can't afford for the government to keep trying to solve every problem for us. But in conclusion, this country isn't great because of the government. It's great because we have freedom. And the only way we stay a free country is if we keep the government in check and operating within the bounds set forth in the Constitution. And in order to do that, we need people who have the courage to stand up to those in power. We need more criminal defense attorneys. And even if you don't become a criminal defense attorney, it's your responsibility as an American to challenge those in government who seek to encroach on your freedom. If the government has all the power and all the money, we won't have any freedom, and we'll live at whims of bureaucrats. So it's up to you as a good citizen to stop that from happening and make sure that this stays a free land. So I'm Jennifer Bukowsky, and I never would have guessed 17 years ago that I'd end up owning my own business as a criminal defense attorney where I spend each and every day fighting the government. But please know that I don't fight the government because I hate the government. I fight the government because I love America, and I hope that one day you are fighting alongside me.